Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
I'm Caroline Hepker, and this is Here's Why, where we take one news story and explain it in just a few minutes with our experts here at Bloomberg.
They're ugly, they don't work, they kill your birds, they're bad for the environment. So I'm trying to have people learn about wind real fast. Some countries are still trying, and they're destroying themselves.
President Trump is crystal clear about his dislike for wind farms. He says they're too expensive and inefficient, that they spoil the view, they cause cancer, and even drive whales crazy. But now President Trump's attacks on renewable power are fundamentally reshaping the US energy landscape, jeopardizing thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in investment at home and abroad. His administration is stepping up its efforts to reverse President Biden's environmental agenda, revoking permits for wind farms and solar projects and ending some altogether. With me in the studio is Rachel Morison, who leads Bloomberg's power, gas and renewables coverage in Europe. Why does Trump loathe renewables and what he sometimes calls windmills in particular?
It is, as you mentioned, for a variety of reasons, from what we sort of thought at the beginning, which was some of his friends who had homes off the coast of New England didn't like the look of the turbines spoiling their view. And Trump also has a golf course in Scotland and he doesn't like to look out at wind farms when he's playing golf there. So there's that part of it. And then we've heard all kinds of reasons from him, from cancer to the impact it has on whales. None of those things have any scientific proof, but what we are seeing is, for whatever reason he dislikes wind farms, it is showing up in real policy and stopping things being built.
How is the US administration ramping up then its anti-renewables agenda?
In many ways, we're seeing it in how policies are made. At the beginning of this administration, Trump's second, he said that they wouldn't be taking into account climate change and the cost of climate change into any policies. And what we're seeing is him revoking, or his ministers revoking, permits. So sometimes those are for projects that haven't been started and are still in development, and that's very disruptive and bad for investment. But we have seen examples, and this is more serious, where a wind farm is already being built and one that's almost 80% finished that has had a stop work issued to it. So it ranges, but it's really on taking away the permission to build these projects that he has been focusing on.
How much is this then about denying climate change?
Trump himself sort of hasn't clearly denied climate change, although it's true that it's not just wind he dislikes, it's also solar. He sort of seems to be taking into account lots of different viewpoints. You know, with solar, he doesn't like it because of farmers. With wind, he doesn't like the look of them. So some of it is to do with his own personal view, but we have seen across the administration a sort of attempt to undo some of the climate policies that had been put in place. So, you know, a lot of that comes down to his views on drill, baby, drill, you know, that often cited phrase that he would prefer America to focus on oil and gas, which they have a lot of, and the price is low, rather than building renewables.
What is the impact on the US economy then of these decisions? How much does it weaken the US economy?
Yeah, it could have a really serious impact. And that's one of the things I think we find most surprising when talking about this story, is that it's not just the jobs and the companies that have set up US businesses to develop these projects. It's also the investment climate. Because if you have a government that is changing policy after investment decisions have been made, that has a huge impact for the cost of capital and the risk involved with those projects. And we are hearing people talking about whether that can be extended to non-renewables projects too. Just, it's expensive to build in America because political risk is high. And, you know, that is something that Donald Trump will not want to see, but it is definitely a factor.
What does this mean for the global economy and the international businesses like Ørsted and others who have made these decisions?
Yeah, particularly for the Europeans who have gone to the US to try to expand their offshore wind businesses. So we have Ørsted, we have RWE, we have Iberdrola. There's a big impact because this was a way to grow their businesses and they're now unable to do that. And we have Equinor as well, who had a project that was restarted after being stopped. But there's a cost to it because all of these companies have got supply chains, have got people lined up to do all the work. So, they have to pay fines and things if they don't complete on contracts. So it's not no cost to even stop or delay a project. It has a huge knock-on effect. And these companies, when they're coming and reporting earnings, Ørsted has been hugely hit by what's gone on in the US, and they're having to do an enormous capital raise to try to stabilise the business because they had gone big in US offshore wind, and a lot of those projects have either been cancelled or they still have two that have a big question mark over them.
On the other side of this story, building wind power does have some disadvantages. Have some investments in renewables been hot air?
Yes, we have heard that argument, especially from US Energy Secretary Chris Wright, that it's a government-funded business, building wind farms. And yes, throughout Europe, renewables do receive government subsidies, but the cost of the technology has come down hugely over time. And what sort of happened is we've reached almost a floor for that when it's come to offshore wind. So the cost has come down enormously to the point where it is competitive. And now those costs are rising slightly. And that's for many reasons: supply chain costs, inflation, just it's more expensive to borrow money to build these projects. So the cost is coming up slightly, but it's not that they're not profitable or they only can survive with government support. But because they needed to get up and running in the US, the industry is non-existent. It does need some subsidy, but the idea is that later on it will stand on its own and give you free power.
Well, how much then does the Trump campaign end US support for clean energy, in particular wind power? Could it be reversed in future?
I think at the moment we have all kinds of a range of expectations from people. From Trump could extend what he's doing to permits from just offshore to onshore as well, and then possibly to solar. So it could get worse in some people's mind. And then on the other hand, people sort of think, well, he could be done. I think most of the reporting that we've done, and also the New York Times has done, shows that there is a significant push within the administration to stop these offshore wind projects being built. And I mean, why would you come back if you think that policy is going to change every 4 years? That's not what investors like as a stable environment to invest in. So I think it could be permanently damaging if it gets to the point where projects are permanently halted.
Rachel, thank you for speaking to me. Rachel Morison, who leads Bloomberg's power, gas and renewables coverage in Europe. Thank you. For more explanations like this from our team of 3,000 journalists and analysts around the world, go to bloomberg.com/explainers. I'm Caroline Hepker. This is Here's Why. We'll be back next week with more. Thanks for listening.